Hello and welcome to the Joyful Friar podcast. I'm your host, Father Nathan Castle. Today is the third in a series that we call spiritual practices that'll arise from the story of Clare and Celie. That story is told in full in my Afterlife Interrupted book 2. What we'll focus on today is how their stories inspired the real-life grief work of my friend and guest today. She's going to be using a screen name that she's chosen, Peaceful Hiker. So again, you can catch the first 2 parts of this 3-part series in the previous episodes, but I'm sure that you're going to enjoy today's visit with Peaceful Hiker.
About 15 years before I don't really lose them. They actually get murdered. Sometimes when I think, oh, you lost your family, it's like they're hiding somewhere. No, they are actually murdered and they're departed. So 15 years before my family's murdered, I have what I call a spiritual vision, which is an image of the mind. And I believe that God continues to communicate with us through visions to help us navigate challenging times.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm in the presence of Mary, and she's pointing to a hot and dry trail behind her. And my family's driving off in the opposite direction. And it's just making me angry. And so I'm feeling abandoned, and they're driving off in this wood-paneled station wagon with the radio and air conditioning. I remember that being a very big deal for me. And Mary's just pointing to this really difficult trail, and I respond in anger, which is not my proudest moment. And what's interesting about it is Mary doesn't react. She just stands there and continues to point to this trail. And even though I'm having a temper tantrum and I'm absolutely failing to recognize that I'm not abandoned, Mary is there, right? If you need anybody, you'd want Mary to be there in the middle of your suffering and your trials. She understands suffering. And so as I fast forward, and that was 15 years prior to my family being murdered. And as part of handling all the anger and grief, I actually began to hike. So Mary was informative as well as prescriptive. And it's through hiking that I actually learned to navigate my feelings in a fairly constructive way.
Good. I think it's worth reminding people that might not be that familiar with the Christian story that Mary was at the foot of the cross of her only son and watched his death. So like you, she has a kind of authority that can say, I've been through something similar. Now, did it feel different from other dreams?
Yeah, this wasn't a dream. This was actually a vision. So
vision.
I'm awake. It's almost like you're going about your day and then it's interrupted. Your day is being interrupted by this broadcast.
Okay.
And I actually don't know how long it took. I think it was pretty fast. God is efficient, if nothing else, and can communicate a lot of things in a very short period of time.
Yes, that's true.
And so I always enjoyed being outside, but I wasn't much of a hiker, and hiking really is just walking. And so as things would become really difficult, I would just if I was working, I would just, close the books I was working on and just hike. I would just go outside and I would walk around the block, or I would walk up a hill. By the end of it, I was basically too exhausted to be angry anymore.
All right. This is a podcast that's audio only for people who want to listen, and then it's also on YouTube, so they see video as well. And for those that are only listening, I'm looking at the video, and you chose to have a screen name, Peaceful Hiker, and you chose a photo. Would you describe what the photo looks like and why you chose it?
Yeah, that photo is in Lassen National Park. And I basically hiked up part of a mountain, and half of it's covered with clouds. And it just reminded me of, we can understand only so much, but behind the clouds, there's all these other things. It's like the cloud of unknowing. And that's why we don't know everything. So we just need to do the best we can and navigate towards a peaceful heart, even when we're grieving and we're suffering and life is really, really difficult. The idea is to never give up.
All right. What picture I'm looking at, for our listeners, it's a perfect square, and almost the entire upper half of it is in a complete white gray cloud. And then are you the figure in the lower left that's the
Yes.
hiker? Okay.
Yes.
So there's a hiker that's you, with a white cap and a kind of a blue outfit. It looks like you've got stuff on your back. I don't know if it's a trail or just a change in terrain.
I think it's just a train. I think I'm on the edge. I'm on the side of the mountain, and it's shooting across the valley. So it's like the mountain on the other side.
All right. And so are you saying that the inner emotional struggle of coping with such deep loss was kind of paralleled in making your body climb a mountain?
Yes.
Okay.
And it was, for me, the most constructive way to handle emotions that were overwhelming. It's very easy to slide into addictive behaviors when you're suffering. And hiking was, for me, the solution to processing really, really difficult emotions. I'm just out there processing the loss, and the hikes could be very, very difficult. So yeah, it's synonymous with losing your loved ones.
Well, you gave me some notes in writing that you were going to talk from, and in them you say about hiking, was that it, as you put it, hiking requires presence or mindfulness lest you fall off the trail and into a lake or a tree.
Yes.
You have to stay in the present moment and watch your footing.
You do. You can still manage, your mind could still get away from you, but it's not safe to be outdoors hiking a mountain and not be fairly present. So I'm not saying that it's a panacea for everything that's going on in your mind, but it's very, very helpful.
Yeah.
And then what happens is there's moments of transcendence. So I love watching the ducks land on a river. It just cracks me up. And so there's these moments where you're just taken by surprise and you get relief. The problem with the suffering is it's endless. I would wake up in the morning and think, oh my God, it's not a dream. It's really happening to me. And this is a nightmare. And so by going outside and experiencing something unexpected, that was a shift in perspective as well. So we have your books that are helping us shift, and then the hiking helped me shift. Now, there might be listeners who, hiking and dirt and bugs are the last thing they want to deal with, but they might enjoy going to a museum and experiencing a moment of transcendence with, an artist by a painting that just moves them, and it reminds them of the beauty that still remains in the world, even though they've experienced something very, very ugly.
Yes. I've been through my own griefs, nothing on the scale of yours, but I've and I recommend to other people, be around beauty.
Yes.
Even if you don't think of yourself as an artsy person, and you don't have to have a green thumb in order to buy some plant at a nursery and put it where you can look at it. A scented candle, I don't know, treats of some kind or another. Sometimes I'll do a rugged counseling session with someone, or maybe a hard confession, and for their penance I'll say, go for ice cream.
Oh,
Do something that just reminds you that there are joys, simple joys near you, and however
yeah.
hard your life is, there are simple pleasures too.
Well, and I listen to music, so I have a playlist that I've put together, really upbeat songs. So music can help in even reading a book. Sometimes you're reading and some author says something in a specific way, and you go, oh, me too. Okay, I'm not alone. There's somebody else that's experiencing the world like I am, and I just feel a little less isolated.
Right. Well, my first book was on the Wizard of Oz, and Toto to the Wizard of Oz is a spiritual adventure, and it's my all-time favorite movie. But right behind it is The Sound of Music.
Oh, yes.
Maybe I'll write a book about that one of these days. But I'll always have liked the 1965 film version of that story, where Julie Andrews as Maria von Trapp sings to these orphan children in a thunderstorm. Do you remember that
That's
scene?
right. Yes.
They're all scared, and some of them are too old to be that scared, and kind of ashamed that they are, but they all end up, like all of them, in one big bed. And she starts singing to them about raindrops on roses and whiskers on kittens, bright copper kettles and warm woolen mittens. Sometimes I'll sing that to myself when I'm discouraged or depressed or down about something. I run that through my imagination and try to get rid of that ugly buzz.
Yeah.
Buzzes in your ear. There can just be some ugly buzzing that wants to discourage you, and I'll just sing about my favorite things. And I know it's ridiculous. That doesn't matter. It just reminds me my thing is not bright copper kettles or what if it's schnitzel with noodles. But I can at least start thinking about things that I'm grateful for and happy for, and doesn't have to be a good day. I don't have to be in a good mood. I can just do that. And
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that's the shift. That's what I call the shift, right? You're having a really bad day. Well, what can you do to lighten it for yourself?
Even if it's momentary, the bad day is going to be there when the hike's over, and there's no guarantee that the hike puts you in a good mood. Although it probably does at least make you tired, maybe more prone to sleep well.
Well, it made me tired. It helped me process the anger.
Yeah.
And then, like I said, there were moments of transcendence that I felt were just gifts. It was like, hey, remember, there's still beauty in the world. I think that's really important. When your focus is on loss, you forget. And one major theme for me is that I need to keep on reminding myself, you know what? I understand this terrible thing happened, but it's still a beautiful world.
Let me ask you this. Do you ever have inner thoughts that say, I'll never see them again? They've been ripped away from me. and now I'll never see them again, or that kind of thing. Does that enter in?
No, I believe that we're eternal. And in our Catholic faith tradition, we talk about the body of Christ.
Mhm.
And so I can call on them and ask them for help, and I still talk to them. And so I believe that we're all eternal. I don't believe that they're gone. I just believe that they've gone before me. And, at some point, we'll all be reunited. But in the meantime, I have a job to do. And it's my responsibility not to give up. I'm here, get it done.
Yes, and you have a family that relies on you too.
Well, they're older. My son was in college, and my daughter was just leaving for college when they were murdered. So they didn't rely on me like little children would.
Yes.
But I also felt a sense of responsibility that I needed to show them that really bad things can happen and you can struggle, but you can actually navigate your way through it and be a stronger and more compassionate person.
Amen.
Because of the suffering I experienced, I don't want anybody to ever feel that way. It is too overwhelming and it is too difficult. And so now as I move through the world, I don't take anything personally. And when I encounter people, I just try and be kind.
Amen. Well, much of my career has been in campus ministry where I've been at the service of people from especially like 18 to 25. And I know very well that they're not fully adult. They even will refer to that. They'll say, 20-year-olds will talk about the fact that if they do something all together, or if campus ministers are in the room, they'll say, well, we're also going to have adults here. They'll call themselves young adult,
Mhm.
and sometimes adult, but then there are also things that remind you that you're not considered fully adult by everybody, like especially the rental car companies. They won't rent to you until you're 26.
Good point.
Anyway. All I meant to say was, yes, they didn't have to rely on you the way that an 8 and a 10-year-old might have, but you're still mom to an 18-year-old or a 22-year-old.
Well, and a role model for how do you navigate suffering.
Yes, maybe it
And
won't be something as horrible as what you had to go through, but nobody moves through life without struggles of one kind or another.
well, everyone experiences loss.
Yes,
And and it really doesn't have to be just about loss. Suffering comes in different forms,
of
right?
course,
So
sure.
somebody might be suffering physically. Um, it could be through a grief situation.
Divorces, job losses, family dynamics, they're all kind of things that can throw people off.
Right. And I actually don't believe in comparative suffering.
Yes,
I think suffering is suffering and it's difficult, but it's not impossible to navigate your way through.
I've had some experience of that myself, and sometimes my prayer goes dialogic with the Lord, and I've tried that thing about feeling like, well, I want to bring you my suffering, but I know that my suffering is not as bad as that homeless person or that been through all these gun things that we hear about in the news and so on. But what the Lord Christ has done for me is say, you don't need to speak to me that way. Your
Yeah.
suffering belongs to you, and I know it does. And I would never compare your suffering to that of another and think it was unimportant.
Right. And it's how we're experiencing the world. Each individual just by being here is important. And
Yes.
so their suffering is important. I do think that suffering is an actuality of being here. Sometimes you might hear that suffering is a choice, but if you love somebody, it's going to be hard.
Yes. I've sometimes, you know how people will use the word powerful to describe the emotion of grief. It can seem overpowering. And I've tried to use a kind of a metaphor of like a electrical generating station that for whatever reason, I now am the owner of a whole dung load of, I'm trying to avoid the S word, of powerful emotion. And then I try to say, you know, that stuff becomes fertilizer when it's spread out. And then I try to use little things in my imagination when I'm at prayer to say, let's spread some of this out where it'll do some good. Let's take some of this that's inside of me that is hurting me, and let's spread a little bit of it out and put it over here where it might make something grow.
That's a beautiful analogy. I used to imagine a 12-foot wall of dung coming my way. Taking a little bit off of it and spreading it around would be not a 12-foot wall, maybe it'd be 11-foot wall, and that's an improvement, right?
I never even played Pac-Man, but I knew what it was. You know, that little thing that just went through tubes of some kind and gobbled up everything in front of him. The other one, I think it was Mario Brothers. I didn't play that one either, but I was aware of it. Where didn't they have some like little wheelbarrow and some little character that wheeled something around? In the world, I chose that. I don't know, but there was a time in my life where I was hurting as much as I had ever hurt. I said to the Lord, first of all, it's important to try to make it the incoming stuff stop. You know, one of the people can get in a grief spiral where they feel like it keeps coming toward them more and more and more. And for me, I just said, I can't take that. I need to imagine this as having already maxed out, that my grief is a certain amount of stuff that I can now subtract from until it's gone. Did you ever do anything like that?
I felt overwhelmed all the time. You know, I'm in shock and I'm overwhelmed. So what I would do is I would imagine taking whatever problem it was or issue, and I would put it in a little box and put a little bow on it. And I would I'd imagine tying it to a balloon and just sending it to God. And I would just say, I can't deal with this. This is yours. Please help me.
That reminds me of brown paper packages tied up with strings. You distinguish between meditation and contemplation, said that meditation didn't work for me because every time I tried to quiet my brain, I'd have flashbacks to the trauma. So, but contemplation worked for you, and for some people, those might be synonymous. So would you explain the difference in your mind?
In my mind, meditation is sitting down and trying to quiet your brain. I just couldn't do it. All roads led back to Rome, and Rome was the murder scene. And
Yes.
so it was traumatizing.
Mm-hmm.
I became a Benedictine oblate last year, but I actually studied for 20 years under the Benedictines. What they do is something called contemplation, in which they read, they ponder, and they pray. And for my traumatized brain, that was very helpful. So in terms of reading, each generation is gifted with individuals that model transcending suffering and grief. There's a wealth of material out there that we can use. What you want to read is someone who reminds or challenges you to focus on the good and gives you peace and hope. So for me, Dr. Edith Eva Eger, she's a Holocaust survivor. She was a friend of Viktor Frankl.
Mm-hmm.
She is an amazing human being who shows you how it can be done even in Auschwitz, which I can't imagine a more difficult trial.
Yes.
And she also talks a lot about forgiveness, which I think is very important when you're suffering. Read a paragraph, you could read a line, and then what you want to do is you want to see what speaks to you, what says, I am for you today. And then you take those words or phrases into yourself and you allow it to interact with your world of concerns, your memories, or your ideas. So you're reading this material, you've had this traumatic experience. So you're not going right into the trauma, you're kind of a trauma adjacent, right? You're like, I've had this terrible incident, but I'm reading about forgiveness. Let's see how I can incorporate that into my life.
Yes.
It takes time. It's not an over, like, you don't read once and then everything is okay.
Right.
And I continue the contemplative practice because I want to remain peaceful as I move through the world. So it's never a one and done. It's more about doing it every day for a very short period of time.
You're feeding your imagination new material, so it has something else to chew on besides the trauma memory.
Yes, exactly. That is so well said.
That's from my experience. I again, your trauma is way beyond what I've experienced. But if you ever get angry, not just so much about the murder, but about the way that happened years ago now, and it's still intruding into my day. You ever
All
feel
the
that?
time. I mean, I was crying 2 weeks ago. I was sitting at my desk and it all flooded back in and I was crying again. I'm not sure it will ever go away as much as I found a way to deal with it and live a life that's constructive and
Yeah.
not destructive.
Some people who are more skilled explicitly in grief support, grief counseling, kind of theory of grief, and the academic study of it, will talk about allowing grief to take its turn. You can be here from 4:30 to 5, and then you must go, and then I'm going to cook dinner or whatever. That some people have found that helpful rather than just allowing it to move in anytime it feels like it.
I think if you can do that, that's great.
Yeah, maybe not everybody can, and there's not always one key at the lock for these kind of things. It really is that you need kind of a tool chest.
Well, and I think when it's really early, it doesn't care what you want.
Yeah, that's well said.
So with contemplation, you read, you ponder, and then you pray. And what you want to do is you use words, ideas, or your imagination, and you interact with God. And this is very important. You interact as if you know you are absolutely loved and accepted. And then you rest in that. You can relax in that knowledge. It's a peaceful time because you don't have to be X, Y, or Z. You just understand that you are fully loved and you are fully accepted. And that's it. There's no other goal. Now, sometimes when I get to the prayer part, I might throw in can you help me with this? Or, this is what I'm struggling with. Do you have any thoughts? I think that can be helpful as well.
Yes. Do you mean because you don't demand of yourself that you're finished grieving or that you are great at it or something, that you keep saying, I'm doing the best I can, please help me?
It could be about the grief, but it could also be just your daily life.
Yeah.
It could be everything becomes exhausting and overwhelming. So you're stretched so thin and your neighbor can say hi and you can think, what do you mean by that? Right? You're not processing things properly. So you can ask help for grief, but you can also say, you know what? I need to calm my heart right now. Can you help me calm my heart? Or you can say, you know what? Next time I interact with this human being, I need to really be reminded that everything is actually okay.
What if we move on to the part of the notes that you sent me that you call kitchen sink ideas?
Okay.
First of all, why did you use that metaphor?
Well, there's these ideas, forgiveness, humility, and gratitude, which play an important part in healing, but sometimes I feel like they're pushed too soon on people who are suffering. Sometimes you'll watch the news and something really bad happens and the people, 24 hours later are talking about how they forgive the other person.
Right.
And it took me a really long time. I had to work at forgiveness, and I think we need to allow the process time and not shove down somebody's throat these other concepts. So they tag along, but I think there's a real issue when we demand forgiveness from somebody. I was very early on, I was walking with somebody and they turned to me and they said, well, have you forgiven the person who murdered your family? And I turned to him and I said, well, why don't you ask me that question in 20 years?
Oh, that's a good answer.
It's not that I didn't want to forgive that person, and I have forgiven that person, but I need to do it. It needed to make sense to me.
That's a pretty big tall order, given what you went through.
It can be done, but it's got to be on people's own time frame.
Yes. You've read my afterlife books. You know that I've dealt with people who have either been murdered, as of course Claire was, or I've also dealt with some people that did the murdering. But everybody has a story, and there's always a backstory and a reason. But you're absolutely right. It's not up to anybody to else to tell you what to do and when to do it. Yeah, I love your answer. Ask me in 20 years if that's your truth, and tell your truth. But you also said, yes, I have kind of, or at least I've started something like that.
I've worked on forgiveness. My dad and we actually talked about forgiveness before he passed away. And one day I asked him, I said, hey, how do you forgive a person? And he looked at me and he said, well, I forgive him every morning. And then I wake up the next day and I forgive him again. We put too much pressure on people.
Yeah.
And that it's to our own benefit to forgive others because we don't want to carry all that baggage. When we actually forgive, it allows us to drop the baggage and start moving forward in peace. But that is going to take time.
Sure. I've taught from my own experience, and as a pastor and a preacher, and particularly younger lives, I've often made the distinction between forgiveness and reconciliation. Have I ever done that in your presence?
No, but I would love to hear it.
Well, I'm glad you would. Glad you asked. I think forgiveness can be done unilaterally. You don't have to wait for another person to say they're sorry or ask forgiveness to forgive them, or at least start forgiving them. And my model for that is Jesus on the cross. One of his last words was, Father, forgive them. They don't know what they do. And it was plural. It wasn't aimed at any one person. He just said, Father, forgive them all. They don't know what they do. Well, how in the world could that be true? How in the world could you crucify a person and not know it would hurt? It's designed not only to kill them, but to make it prolonged and as painful as possible. But I just go to him and say, I don't have enough of that in me. Would you give me some of what do you got? You seem to have a lot of power to forgive. Would you give me some? Kind of like your daily bread. And I try not to do it under my own power, but I say, I don't have to do it under my own power. I believe you could give me some of the power to do a day's worth or a breath's worth of forgiveness. You know how in AA they discourage people new to the 12 steps from saying, I'm not going to drink today or this week. If it has to be moment by moment, I'm not going to drink this minute. I'm not going to drink the minute after, until there begins to be a sense of momentum. And I just have done that in my life. But reconciliation is from the word circle. And to reconcile means to be back in the circle with, or to invite back into the circle. That, of course, it takes two. You can't be reconciled with someone who doesn't want to speak to you. And in the 12 steps, you're even discouraged when you get a little bit of sobriety. You're discouraged from being a man or woman on a mission and starting to seek out all the people you've offended so you can apologize to them, because some of them might have a restraining order out against you to begin with. You might have done something to them that doesn't even allow you to be in contact with them, or they might not want any contact with you and you've given them reason. And so sometimes I've coached people, if you're going to try it, remember that when you say the words, I am sorry, the subject of the sentence is I. It can be the ego, but the sentence, would you please forgive me, the subject is you. So you might want to consider whether you can start there. Would you please forgive me? And I often say, and you might even add, at your earliest convenience, or should the thought ever occur to you?
Yeah.
Should there ever come a time when, would you please forgive me, rather than forcing a person on your schedule to reply to your request or your demand. Well, I said I'm sorry. That's even worse.
I use that. I think of Jesus on the cross when he says, forgive them, Father, they do not know what they're doing. I mean, I think they did know that they were putting Jesus on the cross, but they didn't know why, right? They were offended, but now, you've got the ego operating. They're operating from the ego and not the heart. And I think of that very often is sometimes we react and we don't even know why we're behaving in a certain way.
Well put.
The other thing I do is I think of Christ when he comes to the apostles and they're in the upper room. He's been crucified, and the first thing, at least I think it's the first thing, you'll correct me, he says, peace be with you.
I don't need to correct you because he says that over and over again. You're talking about the risen Christ after his death and after Easter morning.
If we can navigate to a place where we have peace in our heart, I believe the world would be a different place.
You and me both, sister.
Yeah.
That's why I chose to go public with all these stories of people dying these awful deaths who even afterwards have a happy story to tell. And sometimes it goes silly in the direction of Clare and Celie. I'm quite confident that your family members haven't had their last fun time, they're or have not lost a sense of the ridiculousness of things. Anyway, I've seen so much of it, I just can't think another way.
Well, and I agree with you, and I look forward to that day when we'll all be reunited. But in the meantime, I have a job to do here. So I'm ecstatic that someday we can all be ridiculous together. And in the meantime, I'm going to focus on the good.
What's your job to do here?
I don't know. Sometimes when people ask me what I do, I'm an accountant, but what I really want to tell them is that I work for God. What I have is the capacity to listen and respond in a way that's uplifting for other people. And I think we need that now in this world.
Yes.
And I believe that's my job.
Do you feel like you're doing your job by doing this interview?
I do, but I also feel like I'm doing the job when I go to the grocery store and there's a checkout clerk and I ask her, "How are you?" And she tells me how she is. And we have a conversation around that. It's a small job, but it's an important job.
It sounds just like being fully present to every moment of your life.
I'm trying.
You and me both. Well, we're near the end of this time. What have you not said that you'd like to say?
What I want to do is encourage others that there is a way to navigate through the suffering to a more peaceful existence. I know I've said it many times during this podcast, but I think it bears repeating that it's difficult, but it's not impossible and it can be done. Don't give up. And that help is a complete prayer.
Yes. Help is a complete prayer. One thing I'm going to make sure that we do in the show notes as this gets, packaged for people to find on, wherever they get podcasts or YouTube, is the reading list that you provided when you were talking earlier about contemplative reading and things that you found helpful. So if in addition to the ones that you've supplied already, if any others come to mind, you can let us know and we can make sure that some of those things that helped you, maybe they'll help other people.
That sounds great.
Well, this has been a joy and really an honor. And I knew that I was asking a lot of you when I first contacted you and asked whether you'd be willing to do this. And you were so quick to say yes and so thoughtful about preparing for it. I'm grateful for that.
Oh, well, I'm grateful for any time that we spend together and the opportunity to encourage others.
That's it for today. If you'd like to be in touch with me, you can do that through my website, nathan-castle.com. I'd love to hear from you. God bless you. Bye-bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Joyful Friar. You can visit me at nathan-castle.com. Send me a message by clicking the contact button. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can make a donation by clicking the donate button. See you next time.